to Florida. Well, good Tuesday. I'm Chuck Todd. Welcome to MTP Daily. And the third stop in our Meet the Midterms road trip. We're coming to you live from Barefoot Beach at Whiskey Joe's in a nearly humidity-free Tampa, Florida. Thank you for, I miss the humidity. There's so little of it here today. But of course, it's a state that once again could decide, well, just control or perception of everything. There's Washington it could decide control of, the perception of politics for the next decade. You name it, all of it could be decided here in Florida. Florida's been the swingiest of swing states in recent elections. But new polling out this week suggests it could be swinging in the Democrats' direction. We're going to have much more. I think there's more of a 50-50 crowd back there than you think, but who knows? We'll see. Anyway, we'll have much more on those numbers in just a minute. But we're going to begin with President Trump's final push 2 weeks before Election Day.
A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. And you know what? We can't have that. You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
So that was a surprising admission there by the president, campaigning alongside Ted Cruz last night in Houston, Texas, making his closing argument, an argument not always rooted in truth, but rooted in a lot of promises.
This is for middle-income people, all middle-income people, a big tax cut, 10%. We'll be putting it in next week.
And rooted in fear.
What's happening right now as a large group of people, they call it a caravan. I think the Democrats had something to do with it, and now they're saying, I think we made a big mistake, because people are seeing how bad it is, how pathetic it is. And in that caravan, you have some very bad people. You have some very bad people.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that. Keep in mind, there is no evidence of any criminals in the Central American caravan. No evidence that somehow Democrats are funding the caravan. We've even heard this bizarre George Soros rumor sitting out there. And it's also hard to pass any tax cut without Congress in session until November 13th after the election. But hey, those are facts. Don't let that get in the way of a good midterm strategy, apparently. A strategy that, according to the Washington Post, the president's advisors and political operatives say is to paint a portrait of a chaotic, dangerous world with Trump and Republicans as the panacea. Well, we're going to find out 2 weeks from today if the president's strategy does resonate with enough voters. But here in Florida, it appears, and I'll have to tell you, a lot of us longtime Florida observers aren't quite sure what to make of these polls. But a lot of them appears that it isn't, that things are somehow moving to the left here in Florida. In the race for governor, Democrat Andrew Gillum, who will join me later this hour, leads Ron DeSantis by 6 points in a new Quinnipiac poll. That's the same spread in the Senate race here with incumbent Bill Nelson. They have Bill Nelson leading Rick Scott by 6 points. Keep in mind that the last major races in Florida that were close both decided by less than 1 percentage point. So take those 5 percentage points leads with a big grain of salt. Time to bring in tonight's panel. So with me here in Florida, Amy Hollyfield. She is the senior deputy editor of the Tampa Bay Times and associate editor of PolitiFact, a very, very busy organization these days. And Adam Smith is a longtime colleague and political editor of the Tampa Bay Times. In fact, you just don't do Florida without either Adam Smith or my buddy Mark Caputo down at the Herald. I think you'd be okay with that, right?
I'll be okay.
All right. Up in New York, I have Bret Stephens, op-ed columnist for the New York Times, and of course an MSNBC contributor. And also joining us, Jason Johnson, the politics editor for TheRoot.com, also an MSNBC contributor as well. All right. I got my Florida panel, got my D.C. panel. No offense, guys. I'm going to start with my Floridians. Adam, you've watched this a long time. Is Florida making this sharp of a left turn as these polls in the last week indicate?
I'm a little skeptical. I think Florida, you just assume it's going to be a margin of error race, 1 or 2%, and that's what most of these polls show. The trend certainly does show good news for Bill Nelson and Andrew Gillum And certainly there's been more energy and excitement for Andrew Gillum than I've ever seen for a Democratic nominee for governor.
Is this, how much of this, it feels as if when we talk about these races, we talk about Andrew Gillum and Rick Scott. What we don't talk about, and by the way, the two of them are not running against each other. I think sometimes voters we don't talk about their two opponents as much. It seems like both Bill Nelson and Ron DeSantis have a bit of a, is it just an attention issue, a charisma issue? What would you draw it up to?
I'd say neither one of them is running a terrific campaign. Bill Nelson waited to spend his money until September. He's been under attack, full throttle attack from Rick Scott, going back to early. And Ron DeSantis, he's just been a one note in terms of the campaign he's run, which is TV, TV, TV.
The nationalization of these Florida races, Adam, it's bizarre to me that the governor's race has become more nationalized than the Senate race. The Senate race feels like it's being argued about local issues, and yet the governor's race is about national issues.
Well, I think that's the Trump effect. I mean, certainly Ron DeSantis, nobody remembers TV ads. Everybody remembers that ad. Teaching your daughter how to build a wall, et cetera.
Right.
So he, but for a tweet from Donald Trump, he probably would not be the nominee and poised to be the next governor because he's very little known. I will say, health care, overwhelmingly, that's the issue that people talk about the most, along with, in our area, particularly red algae, red tide.
I want to get into the red tide and red algae. Let me take it national a little bit. Bret Stephens, I want to read you something from the Post about the president's strategy, and curious of your reaction to it. This is Bill Stepien, the White House political director. He goes, voter satisfaction is the enemy of voter turnout. What's changed is that while voters are still happy in the direction the president is leading the country, they're angry at the way Democrats treated Justice Kavanaugh. They're scared when they hear Democrat after Democrat talk about socializing medicine and Medicare for all. And voters are plugged in as the president spends more and more time on the campaign trail. The implication, Bret, is that if their voters are happy, that's a problem. And they've got to make their voters unhappy. Is that the message?
Well, Donald Trump has, from the very beginning of his time on the national stage, politically speaking, been the candidate of fear. That was his strategy from the moment that he descended the gilded staircase at Trump Tower in 2015 to announce his candidacy. Fear of immigrants, fear of Mexicans, criminals, and rapists. And that has served him. That has served him extraordinarily well. I think Democrats have too often played into his hands by sort of constantly harping on everything he says, to the point that it sounds like a car alarm, that Democrats sound like a car alarm that will never go off. But Trump understands that the fear ticket is going to be a winning one for him. The best thing that the Democrats can do is run optimistic campaigns focused on solutions and focused on the question of Trump's character, which leaves many Republicans or former Republicans like me profoundly unsettled.
Jason, it's interesting what Bret said about this issue, that Democrats sort of get so spun up about the things President Trump says, they're misleading, that they almost chase after him too much. But I'm curious. Let me play for you something the president said today when questioned about this idea of Middle Easterners somehow infiltrating the caravan. How should Democrats deal with something like this? Take a listen to the quote and then respond.
I spoke with Border Patrol this morning, and I spoke to him last evening, and I spoke to him the day before. I speak to him all the time. And they say, and you know this as well as anybody, over the course of the year, over the course of a number of years, they've intercepted many people from the Middle East. They've intercepted ISIS. They've intercepted all sorts of people.
I think, Jason, three can become many, depending on how you wanted to use the word many there. But what do you do with something like that, keeping in mind Bret's, I think, correct criticism that sometimes Democrats look like they're almost complaining too much about the president?
Well, Chuck, that's the best part of midterm elections, right? You can always put your finger to the wind and say, all right, look, are people caring about the crazy thing the president has said, or are they concerned about local lakes, local rivers, or school systems? I think there's always been a disconnect, especially during midterms, between statewide candidates and what national Democrats are talking about. If you look at it statewide, these governor's candidates, these congressional candidates, they're talking about health care, they're talking about education, they're talking about reining in this president. It's the national Democrats, the ones who are safe, who are the ones runs chasing around like a dog chasing a car every other insane thing the president says. But the larger issue is this, and I think this is important. Americans don't like what they're hearing. Part of why the Democrats have been so successful and enthusiastic, because Americans just want a president who's going to do his job, make them feel safe, and do good things. The problem is the president doesn't make people feel safe right now with the way he speaks, and that's playing into the Democrats' hands.
Okay, but Bret Stephens, Jeff Flake noted that, he answered what? So why does the president say all these things that are untrue if he knows it? And he said, well, because it works.
Well,
Bret, there is a part of this that works.
No, look, that's absolutely true, and it works in two senses. It works in the sense that there's always going to be, the one superabundant resource in the United States is credulity, and there's always going to be a sector of the electorate that's going to seriously believe that in that caravan of desperate Central Americans looking for a better life, there's ISIS hiding somewhere in there. But it also works in the sense that, if Trump had a strategy, I'm not quite sure how aware of it he is, his strategy would simply be to goad the Democrats by simply inundating them with lies to which they have to react in one way or the other. And I'm simply saying you have to be canny and strategic about what you react to and how you react.
Amy, I introduced you and reminded people you're a deputy editor at PolitiFact. One of the criticisms of us in the press is that, on one hand, we don't correct some of this enough. On the other hand, we spend too much time correcting it and almost are too focused on it to the point of where we've lost the larger point. It gets to the whole seriously, literally issue with this president. How do we cover him seriously without correcting him literally?
That's a great question. It's something we struggle with every day because you can't. Number one, there's too much to do, right? You can't do everything. But frankly, it's pretty easy when you get to some of the things we were just talking about with the caravan, right? Like just blatant misleading statements that he's making about that that's changing the narrative that people are taking away from it. We take it very seriously, our role in calling him out, calling anyone else out on the misstatements they're making.
Have you changed the way you've done some fact checks because you find that people receive them better one way than another as you've gone about this? Because this has been the trickiest environment we've had yet with facts.
We've been at this for 11 years,
right.
And 15,000 fact checks. So we've definitely learned a lot of lessons along the way. And this president, this candidate, he's completely unique and different in every way, politically and factually. So definitely, but it's more about just the judgment calls, the judgment that we made in how much we've been doing and not doing.
Adam, let's bring it back to practicalities. Is what the president's doing the best way to get the Republican vote out here in Florida?
Well, I'm thinking about what Bret Stephens was saying. You think about Hillary Clinton. You think about in Florida, the last two people that ran for governor, the last two Democrats, Charlie Crist and Alex Zink. Most of what they did was just attack the person they're running against, and it just didn't work.
Gillum is doing something different.
Gillum is dramatically different from what we've seen before. He really is talking about his proposals. A lot of his proposals will go nowhere because we're a Republican-controlled legislature,
right.
But he is truly trying to give his agenda, which is not what the Republican is DeSantis.
It's funny, though. That's what DeSantis is doing. He's literally just attacking Gillum. You saw it in the debate the other night.
Right.
There was no substance from him. There was no, I'm going to do this. It was all, Andrew isn't going to do this.
And fear.
Did it remind you of watching
right.
Charlie Crist against Rick Scott going the other way? Or not quite?
Well, I think Gillum is probably more gifted. Charlie Crist has gifts, but Gillum really is pretty gifted in terms of likability.
I got Jason Johnson, one of the more bizarre things the White House put out today was they decided to do a Council on Economic Advisor report today on the issue of socialism.
Right.
They put this out today from the White House, official White House release. Coincidence with the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx's birth, socialism is making a comeback in American political discourse. Detailed policy proposals from self-declared socialists are gaining support in Congress and among much of the electorate. Again, this is official. How would you assess that accuracy of that statement, Jason?
Well, it's not accurate at all. But here's the thing. There's a difference between motivating your base by saying, oh, my gosh, Congress is going to be overtaken by Democratic socialists. It's going to be nothing but a bunch of Bernie-crats, and then offering a decent policy proposal. I think one of the big issues, look, when Trump hits the ground, he's fantastic. He galvanizes people in a way that lots of Republicans on the ground will say, look, we've never seen people this excited. But his White House is terrible at messaging. They really are. Even when he's lying on a regular basis, even when he's talking about socialism, that's not trickling down. Sherrod Brown doesn't have to answer to socialism. Andrew Gillum isn't going to have to answer to socialism. Beto O'Rourke isn't. Stacey Abrams in Georgia doesn't have to worry about that. So these kind of high-minded messages, terrible caravans and socialism invading, that sounds great for the political pundit class, but on the ground, that's not something that people are really concerned about. And that's not helping Republicans who need to be pushing a message about a great economy and keeping this country safe, as opposed to the nonsense that Trump is spouting.
All right, Bret, Jason, Amy, Adam, I want to put a pause, but very quickly, Adam, does the socialism hit work with some South American voters?
I mean, I think he's talking about Venezuela-style socialism. I used to think that was just a play for South Florida, Miami, but then Trump starts saying it, so it's a little wider than just South Florida.
It does, anyway. All right, you guys are all stuck with me for the hour, as this great crowd is also stuck with me for the hour now that they're there. We're going to talk with the